Welcome back. I'm Sharon Mano. I would like to introduce Nino DeSantis. He has an alternative to the big oil projects, although we did hear that alcohol is one of the alternatives. So let's dwell on that for a minute and ask Nino, why is alcohol better than oil or any other alternatives?
Well, I would say, Sharon, there's three reasons that alcohol is a good alternative. Number one, it can be manufactured right here in the United States. We don't have to import alcohol. It can be made from waste products. It can be made from coal mines. It can be made from agricultural waste. Number two, alcohol is more efficient for the internal combustion engine. It has less pollution, and it's also, number three, safer. If you get into a collision with alcohol, the safety factors of alcohol as a fuel, for example, in the Indy 500, they prefer alcohol as a fuel because of the less explosion value that you have in alcohol compared to gasoline.
Well, that safety factor is very important, but why have we been putting it off all these years?
Well, I think that history is a good teacher, showing us that it usually takes a lifetime for any good product to become an alternative to something else that's been around for centuries.
So you feel that the oil companies are seeing the light now, and maybe they're going to listen to you and some other groups that are pushing for the alcohol use?
Well, I would say that the oil industry is already in favor of alcohol, and they're already planning an alcohol for the future, and they're already using alcohol as an extender and an octane booster in many cases. But again, before you go from a small percentage to a full percentage, I feel it's going to be years and years, because that's the nature of history.
What do you think is happening to the environment with this continual use of oil? Are we polluting our lives and our future in that sense?
Well, I compare that to cigarette smoking. On every package, it indicates that this may be hazardous to your health. Actually, the internal combustion engine should have a sign on the side that says if you use gasoline, this is hazardous to your health also, because the pollution value, again, in gasoline compared to alcohol is much, much higher.
Well, I think you've got a point there. What is your group doing actively to promote this?
Well, see, our company is a combustion engineering consultation corporation, but we're also a subsidiary of Brewers Alcohol Fuel. Brewers Alcohol Fuel, like Brewers East, B-R-E-W-E-R-S. We're a public company, and what we're doing now is setting up plants and projects in other countries, specifically countries that have already made the commitment, where the government has already made the commitment to convert to alcohol, and one of those countries right now is Brazil. So most of our projects and our work is in Brazil right now because of the cooperation that we're receiving from the government.
Well, why are you getting reaction from South America, or is Brazil just the only country?
Basically, the price of fuel in those countries where you're talking here, people think that fuel is expensive, but it's not. It's one of the least in any of the countries. In Brazil, for example, you have some parts that fuel is almost $3 a gallon. So that talking alcohol is a very, very logical, practical alternative right now for that country. As of the United States, where your fuel is $1.25, it's still very inexpensive.
And yet some project that we're going to go down to $1 a gallon. Do you see that coming? And if so, will people be interested in alternatives?
Well, I feel that for reason number two and number three, getting back to the pollution value, comparing alcohol to oil as far as the pollution, that by itself should encourage people to seriously consider immediate alternatives in the field of alcohol.
Well, I agree with you, but where has this proven successful? Let's have some examples here.
Well, here in the United States, for example, you have Bank of America for the last 2 years. They've been running 150 cars on straight alcohol. In Sacramento, they've got a conversion system set up there, and they've shown that the pollution index from those cars, the emissions are much less than you have with regular gasoline-burning cars.
But you used also one of the cars locally, didn't you, with the Hollywood Police Department?
Here locally, in 1979, we gave a small demonstration to show how legitimate the system can be of using alcohol. We asked the police department in Hollywood to volunteer a car where we demonstrated by using alcohol in a separate supplementary system and being able to lean out the engine, which you can do with alcohol, and get maximum efficiency. You can get better mileage using alcohol because it has less BTU. As of gasoline is such a hot fuel, so explosive, that the minute that you try to lean out that engine to make it very efficient, you end up burning the valves because it's such a hot fuel. with the alcohol, when we demonstrated with the police car here, we doubled the mileage in 1979 by using alcohol as a supplementary fuel and leaning out the engine to demonstrate what we could do with alcohol in comparison to gasoline.
So it sounds like you had a 100% improvement there.
In that case, we did.
But would that apply to any car, for instance, if it's an older car or a newer car? Or
well, in engineering terms, normally all of the general consensus that gasoline is basically only 35% efficient in the use of the internal combustion engine. They've known this since 1940. One of the great combustion engineers, Ricardo, once said that we're wasting 65% of our energy content using gasoline. But then engineering was not able to solve that high BTU value, that hot energy content, to reduce that efficiency without burning out the engine, without leaning out the engine. But in the case of alcohol, where you have less energy heat, we're able to lean out the engine without burning out the valves and burning out the engine. So you've got a lot of benefits.
I'm just curious, what would it cost the oil companies to convert from oil to alcohol? And is that the reason they're putting this off to some extent?
Well, I would say that looking at it business-wise, being in the oil industry's position, anytime you make a drastic change from one major fuel to another, you have to change your technology, you have to spend millions and millions of dollars. And for them to take on the responsibility for a handful of companies to take on the responsibility of converting the United States, if not the world, to alcohol, that's a big undertaking, and I don't blame them to hesitate in doing that. And I feel that it should not be their responsibility alone. I feel that every individual should contribute to that in one way or another. We have to come out with a solution to help ourselves, not just always depend on Uncle Sam.
So a number of companies could be cropping up, trying to get into some of this action. But I have one question on the cost factor. What would this cost an individual to convert to alcohol?
Well, right now, for example, in Brazil, we manufacture, and we have an affiliation with GE Brazil, and we can manufacture a complete kit, which includes the conversion system and all the different accessories for under $125 US. And normally, a wholesale, that's almost half. So you can see that it's not an expensive project.
Well, it seems to me that you could sell this very easily, and yet I bet you everyone isn't going to rush out and do it tomorrow. Why? Because we think we have an oil glut, it's the easy way, and we don't have the knowledge, perhaps.
Well, I think that human beings, by nature, many times we're like sheep, and we just follow the existing system and wait for certain peoples to make the move.
Now, you've come on here to tell us about your program. What are your goals, Nino?
Well, right now, for example, our goal in Brazil is to convert that country as efficiently as possible and to use that as a spotlight, to use Brazil as the country for efficient alcohol conversion and production. We're in both the production as well as the conversion. Then from there, we feel that the world will see the example and other countries will follow suit to that particular.
And yet you have countries like China trying to get in on the oil action. How are you going to keep that all suppressed? It seems that that's going to really peak now.
Well, I think that alcohol will be one energy alternative. I don't think it'll be the only energy alternative. Just like now you have electric cars that are also an alternative, and a very good alternative.
Well, that would mean probably we'd have to go at a slower pace. In a way, that might be a good thing. Perhaps you could have your big car that really guzzles the gas, and then you could have your smaller golf cart type of vehicle that would be run by electricity. Would that be a...
It might be very healthy for the country, for the nation, for the world to have competition in other alternatives of fuel, gasoline, alcohol, electric cars, solar energy. Every aspect possible would probably bring the prices down because of the competition.
So you're not advocating one method or the other. I had the feeling you were coming on here so pro-alcohol.
Well, I feel to be realistic and to say that we can convert the world to alcohol would take a very, very long time.
So you don't consider yourself a crusader in that sense, then?
Well, I consider myself a crusader and just pioneering the way for alcohol. That by itself is requires a lot of crusading.
Of course it does. When were you first exposed to this method? Was this during the...
In 1976 was our first participation in the alcohol movement.
But hadn't you learned prior to that? Wasn't this used during World War II or thereafter?
In 76, I met the former senior consulting engineer for TRW, Mr. Norman Wag, who was retired, living here in Florida, and I sat and we talked about history and what he had experimented in the field of alcohol when he was a senior consulting engineer for TRW. And at that time, he disclosed to me that alcohol as a supplementary system could increase the mileage in a vehicle easily up to 40%. So we began experimenting in total alcohol conversion in addition to supplementary alcohol conversion. In this country, for example, probably the most practical would be to use alcohol as a supplementary fuel and then gradually go into a total alcohol conversion system.
You know, you touched on something earlier that is a concern of all of us, and that's pollution. What you're saying is that the continued use of oil could make it impossible to live into the future healthily.
Right. If we look at it as far as what is more practical, what is safer for the environment right now, definitely alcohol is safer, it's cleaner, and it's more efficient as a fuel. There's no doubt about that, and all of your engineering data on it proves that. Now, to accomplish that goal, to actually produce enough alcohol as an alternative, that is the big undertaking. Where do we find all of the companies that are willing to invest in a time when the economy is low into projects and plantations to grow agricultural crops, to convert this agricultural crops, to convert the waste, the garbage, to the alcohol? This is the large expense that is the problem.
We can use any of those sources for alcohol?
For example, in 1975, the Lawrence Livermore Institute division of the University of California did a report on what they call the situ gasification process, where they drive a pipe in the coal mines in the U.S. is one of the largest resources of coal mines in the world. We wouldn't have to import. They showed that by this process, they could obtain methane gas, from methane gas converted to methanol alcohol, and, quote, at that time, they reported 5.9 cents a gallon. So your alternative is here. It's right in the U.S. The problem is who wants to spend the money to build the plants, the projects, to get it out and to put it on the marketplace, because now you're talking an investment program that probably would not show a return for 10 years. And not too many businessmen are willing to invest and wait 10 years for their returns when they can have immediate profits with oil.
Well, we've had the same thing with solar energy. Hasn't that been a problem there, too, the investment, the research that would be involved?
Well, most big companies enjoy repeat business. And when you get to solar energy and a lot of your alternatives, the repeat business and the monopolies are not there anymore. Anyone can get into producing alcohol. Right now, with a $25 permit, you're allowed to make 2,500 gallons of fuel alcohol a year on your own grounds.
Sounds interesting. Nino, you know, we have to call it quits for today, but I want to thank you, Nino DeSantis, for sharing your views about alcohol conversion. And now we'll come back with Conrad Patrick. I'll join him, and we'll have point counterpoint on the bottom line right after this.
Well, it comes time for the bottom line. I'm Conrad Patrick, and once again, Sharon, this is a kind of a thing that our discussion today, there's nothing really that we could disagree about. You know, this is kind of unusual for us. We usually find a thing to disagree about. Gary Darby brought up a couple of things that I think I want to make a couple of points on first.
I don't know. I want to disagree on something. Can't we work something out
Well,
here?
we'll talk about that after the show.
Oh, okay.
But right now, on the bottom line, Gary Darby brought up a couple of things that you also brought up with me. I was worried. I was very worried that big oil, as I brought out my little segment with Gary Darby of Chevron, that they're not doing anything, and they are doing things. They are doing things, and he brought out a good point. This oil glut, supposedly, that we are now going through is giving the big people a chance to kind of relax, look over the technology they have, improve the technology they have, and look for alternatives.
But you know something, it's going to take a number of years for that to happen. Yes, they're starting, but perhaps because Nino's been a voice in the wilderness crying out. Yeah, they're effective in Brazil, but they're not even looking to this country right now because we don't charge enough for oil. Therefore, we're going to depend on it, rely on it. The oil glut will continue.
Well, that's quite possible. Right now, a gallon of alcohol would cost you about $3 a gallon. That's twice the price of gasoline, and gasoline is going down.
Well, because they're not getting into the initiation of it, getting it started.
We don't know that for sure, Sharon. I feel that the big oil companies, because they always have been money makers, are always looking for alternatives to make more money. And of course, we, the consumers, will have to pay for it. But at least something is being done.
Well, you know, Nina was telling me about the coal mines and where the oil companies were capping them because natural gas was coming out, and they could have used that from the coal mines. But they put, as I say, they put a cap on that. Why? Why did they want to stop that process? So we would continue to be reliant on oil?
Not necessarily. I think that when Gary and I were talking, like I brought up the internal combustion engine, there's got to be a better way to use full energy in propel an automobile. Those have been worked out, but only because it's been so cheap, inexpensive, economically, over the years, the automobile companies keep making it that way, and petroleum companies keep producing gas the same way.
But you know, something will be more helpful if we have the alcohol, from what Nino told us.
As long as we
It'll
burn
stop the air pollution. Don't you think?
Well, as long as we burn it, don't drink it, I guess we'll be all right.
Well, it energizes your car as well as you, so I think that's a double combination you can't go wrong with.
Well, Sharon, one thing I want to say about this is that it's nice to know that people like Nino, really, are working at an alternative. And that big oil is working at an alternative, too.
Well, I think they're monitoring each other, and I'd like to monitor us and say we'll call it quits for today. And say goodbye to our viewing audience out there. And thank you for joining Priority One. We'll be back here next Saturday.
Businesses like Chuck Stone's trying to get the fledgling methanol industry off the ground. The big boys, however, still seem to be mostly cheering from the sidelines. And where does the government stand in all this? Just about where it stood 5.5 years ago when we did our first story on methanol.
During a one-month test run, this Hollywood police car was installed with a gas-saving device, which injects a high-performance engine. Under careful monitoring, the 1978 car was driven daily by different police officers, and after logging 3,000 miles under the test, the vehicle's gas mileage doubled.
After 1,000 miles, we adjusted the carburetor to use less gasoline. We adjust the car to use 25 to 50% less gas.
This car performs just like my own car. It has pickup, speed, whenever you need it. It runs smooth.
The system is a system by which injects a metered quantity of water and alcohol into the engine upon engine demand. Thus, once entering the engine's carburetor, the water and alcohol mixes with the gasoline particles, enters the combustion chamber. So now we can get as much as 25, 50, or even in some cars' case or vehicles' case, 100% increase.
Despite the system's performance results, the development of alcohol as an alternative fuel is stalled. Not practical, say the experts.
Presently, gasohol, they say, is still too expensive compared to gasoline, but our system uses 50% water with the alcohol.
Currently, there is no mass production of the $200 a unit system. Don Dare, Channel 7 News.